Ladies and gentlemen, President Trump just spoke in front of the United Nations for the first time since stepping back into the White House, and let's just say he wasn't pulling any punches. In fact, President Trump just exposed an absolutely massive anti-American scam that the United Nations has been directly funding, and the best part about it is that he did it directly to their faces. So folks, make sure to stick around for today's entire video because between you and me, I think you guys are going to like this one. Now, as many of you know, the United Nations is perhaps most famous for talking about doing a lot of things, but actually getting absolutely nothing done, and as you might have noticed, that isn't exactly the Donald Trump style, to say the least. Simply put, President Trump is hell-bent on two things: pursuing the America First agenda and working to bring about global peace. And you can either get on board or you can get out of the way, but one way or another, we are full steam ahead. In fact, take a listen to President Trump's opening remarks at his speech at the United Nations just earlier today, pretty much setting the tone for the entire show.
I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen, but she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the two things I got from the United Nations: a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter.
And so, folks, not only did President Trump just absolutely blast the United Nations to their face for doing nothing to help bring about global peace, but he also blasted them for potentially sabotaging the escalator and the teleprompter. And by the way, it seems like that's actually exactly what happened. According to White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, 3 days ago, there were actually numerous United Nations staff members joking on the internet about shutting down the escalator as Trump was riding it, which is exactly what ended up happening today. So honestly, if it were up to me, I would personally have every single one of these UN staffers detained and investigated, maybe even arrested. It's absolutely unacceptable. But now folks, this next clip that I want to show you guys is where President Trump goes absolutely scorched earth on the United Nations and their entire anti-American racket. But before we take a look at that, I do want to quickly say that if you folks enjoy the daily news updates, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton. But okay, check this out.
Not only is the UN not solving the problems it should, too often, it's actually creating new problems for us to solve. The best example is the #1 political issue of our time, the crisis of uncontrolled migration. It's uncontrolled. Your countries are being ruined. The United Nations is funding an assault on Western countries and their borders. In 2024, the UN budgeted $372 million in cash assistance to support an estimated 624,000 migrants journeying into the United States. Think of that. The UN is supporting people that are illegally coming into the United States, and then we have to get them out. The UN also provided food, shelter, transportation, and debit cards to illegal aliens. Can you believe that? On the way to infiltrate our southern border. Millions of people came through that southern border. Just a year ago, millions and millions of people were pouring in, 25 million altogether over the 4 years of the incompetent Biden administration. And now we have it stopped, totally stopped. In fact, they're not even coming anymore because they know they can't get through. But what took place is totally unacceptable. The UN is supposed to stop invasions, not create them and not finance them. In the United States, we reject the idea that mass numbers of people from foreign lands can be permitted to travel halfway around the world, trample our borders, violate our sovereignty, cause unmitigated crime, and deplete our social safety net. We have reasserted that America belongs to the American people, and I encourage all countries to take their own stand in defense of their citizens as well. You have to do that because I see it. I'm not mentioning names. I see it, and I could call every single one of them out. You're destroying your countries. They're being destroyed. Europe is in serious trouble. They've been invaded by a force of illegal aliens like nobody's ever seen before. Illegal aliens are pouring into Europe. Nobody has ever, and nobody's doing anything to change it, to get them out. It's not sustainable. And because they choose to be politically correct, they're doing just absolutely nothing about it. And I have to say, I look at London, where you have a terrible mayor, terrible mayor, and it's been so changed. Now they want to go to Sharia law, but you're in a different country. You can't do that. Both the immigration and their suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Western Europe if something is not done immediately. This cannot be sustained.
And so, folks, like I said, scorched earth. Not only did President Trump just expose the United Nations for funding all of the insane third world migration that's been flooding into the United States and Europe, he also explicitly told Europe that if they don't shut down their borders and stop the immigration, they are very quickly going to cease to exist. But then, on top of that, he also directly called out some of the countries that are personally responsible for all of the third world immigration and put them on blast in front of the entire world. And so, by the way, folks, I've got something I want all of you to take a look at real quick. Right this very moment, there are 193 nations represented in the United Nations. That being said, the United States of America contributes right around 25% of the overall United Nations budget. And to put a number on that, that's right around $5 billion per year. That's a lot of money. Seriously, we're pretty much single-handedly paying for the entire organization, but still, the United Nations has been using that money, our own money, to ship millions of third world immigrants into our country and into Europe, and on top of that, they haven't even been working to help bring about world peace. And so, folks, I'm not saying what we should do here or whether or not the United States should or shouldn't remain in the United Nations, but here's what I will say. Now that President Trump is back in the White House, they've got some very serious explaining to do, and if they want to keep all of that funding that's been coming from all of us, hardworking American taxpayers, to the tune of $5 billion per year, they'd better stop trying to sabotage our national integrity. As far as I'm concerned, the United Nations can either get on board with the agenda and work with President Trump to actually make the world a better place, or they should get out of the way and lose their funding. Because as I like to say, now that President Trump is back in the White House, finally, we are putting America first.